What if I told you the borders of the Middle East were drawn by people who didn't live there?
England is fighting World War I and sends an army composed of Scotch, Welsh, and Irish troops to safeguard its holdings in Egypt.
European nations had seized land in many parts of the world.
Part of Germany's interest in Ottoman Turkey was that they shared a common enemy.
Palestine occupies a mere 27,000 square kilometers, made up of 3 small districts.
Over a century ago, Britain made 3 promises about the same land. Those promises changed the map forever. It wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. People call this a mistake, a product of wartime chaos, bad communication, the fog of diplomacy. It wasn't. These 3 promises were written by the same government, in the same building, by men who could read each other's letters. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were buying 3 different groups of people with the same piece of land because they needed all 3 of them to win a war, and then they won the war and had to figure out what to do next. What they did next is still killing people today. Chapter 1. The Board Before the Game. The Ottoman Empire in 1914. Before we can understand what Britain did, you need to see what was there before they arrived. In 1914, the Middle East was not a collection of countries. It was the Ottoman Empire. 6 centuries old, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, stretching from Istanbul to the Persian Gulf. Arabs, Turks, Kurds, Jews, Christians, Druze, all living within one system, however imperfect. The Ottoman Empire was dying. Decades of military defeats had stripped it of territory. And when World War I began, the Ottomans made a fatal choice. They sided with Germany. For Britain and France, this was opportunity. If the Ottomans lost, and they were going to lose, the entire Middle East would be up for grabs. The most strategically valuable real estate on earth. The Suez Canal, the route to India, the oil fields of Mesopotamia. But Britain couldn't take it alone. They needed help. They needed the Arabs to revolt from inside the Ottoman Empire. They needed Jewish support to bring American Jews and their influence into the war. And they needed France on side, so they made promises, 3 of them, to 3 different groups about the same land, simultaneously, not by accident, by design. Chapter 2. Domino 1. The Arab Promise. October 24th, 1915. Sir Henry McMahon, Britain's High Commissioner in Egypt, writes a letter to Sharif Hussein bin Ali, the guardian of Mecca, the most respected Arab leader in the Islamic world. The deal? Hussein launches an Arab revolt against the Ottomans from inside the empire. In return, Britain promises to recognize and support an independent Arab kingdom covering the Arab lands of the Middle East, including, Hussein understood, Palestine. Britain is prepared to recognize and support the independence of the Arabs in all the regions within the limits demanded by the Sharif of Mecca. Hussein delivers. In June 1916, the Arab Revolt begins. Arab forces, led by Hussein's son Faisal, guided by a British officer named T.E. Lawrence, who history would call Lawrence of Arabia, attack Ottoman supply lines across the desert. It is exactly what Britain needed. The Arab Revolt, 1916 to 1918. Arab forces tied down Ottoman troops, protected British supply lines, and contributed directly to the Allied victory in the Middle East. Hussein had kept his side. He had delivered an army. He had trusted Britain's word. He had not read the letter that had already been written in London. Chapter 3, Domino 2. The Secret Carve-Up. May 16th, 1916. While Arab soldiers are dying in the desert for the promise of independence, 2 diplomats in London are dividing that same land between their countries. Sir Mark Sykes, a British baronet who had visited the Middle East twice and considered himself an expert. François-Georges Picot, a French diplomat who had served in Beirut. Between them, they had a pencil, a map, and the authority of two empires. They drew a line, roughly from the Mediterranean coast to the Persian frontier. Everything above the line goes to France. Everything below goes to Britain. Palestine, the most contested piece, goes under international control, which both sides privately understood meant British control. The agreement was secret. The Arabs didn't know. The Zionists didn't know. Even many members of the British cabinet didn't know. Then the Russian Revolution happened. In 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia and immediately published every secret treaty they found in the Tsar's archives, including Sykes-Picot. The Arabs read about it in the newspapers. Hussein, who had staked his reputation and his army on Britain's word, discovered he had been betrayed before the war even ended. The fatal flaw of Sykes-Picot was that it was a secret built upon a foundation of public lies. Chapter 4. Domino 3. The Jewish Homeland Promise. November 2nd, 1917. British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour writes a letter to Walter Rothschild, a leader of the British Jewish community and a key figure in the Zionist movement. 67 words. That is all it took. The letter declared British support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, with the crucial caveat that nothing should be done to prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. Those existing non-Jewish communities were over 90% of Palestine's population. Why did Britain issue this declaration? Not out of idealism. The reasons were entirely strategic. Britain needed to keep Russia in the war, appeal to Russian Jews. Britain needed American support, appeal to American Jews. And Britain needed to lock in control of Palestine before France could claim it under Sykes-Picot. The Balfour Declaration was not a moral vision. It was a war weapon, issued to serve British imperial interests, paid for with a homeland that Britain did not own, populated by people Britain had no authority over, promised to a group that was a minority there. It was a cynical imperial act that mortgaged one people's homeland to secure another empire's victory, creating a century of conflict from its very first contradictory words. And here is the full picture now. Simultaneously, in the same 2-year window, Britain had promised Arab independence, secretly agreed with France to divide the land, and publicly promised it to the Jewish people. 3 promises, 1 land. Zero intention of honoring all 3. Chapter 5. The pencil hits the map, creating countries in an afternoon. The war is over, the Ottoman Empire is gone, and Britain now controls a vast swathe of the Middle East under League of Nations mandates. It needs to decide what goes where. In March 1921, Colonial Secretary Winston Churchill convenes the Cairo Conference. 40 British officials gather to draw the final map of the post-Ottoman Arab world. They spent 10 days at the Semiramis Hotel. They drew Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine. They installed 2 of Hussein's sons as kings, Faisal in Iraq, Abdullah in Transjordan, as partial compensation for the Arab kingdom that was never delivered. The borders they drew paid no attention to who actually lived there. None. Iraq was created by merging 3 distinct Ottoman provinces: Mosul in the north, dominated by Kurds; Baghdad in the center, Sunni Arab; Basra in the south, Shia Arab. 3 communities with different languages, different religions, different historical loyalties, put inside one border and told they were now a nation. Iraq, created 1921, Shia majority plus Sunni ruling class plus Kurdish north, a Sunni Hashemite king installed over a Shia majority population. A recipe for sectarian conflict that exploded in 2003 and has never recovered. Lebanon was carved out of Syria, specifically to give the Maronite Christian community, France's preferred client, a state where they held power. The result was a country structurally divided along sectarian lines from the moment of its creation. Syria was given to France under mandate, its natural unity severed. The Kurdish people, estimated at 25 to 35 million, were split across 4 countries: Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. They got no state, no vote, no recognition. And Palestine? Palestine became a British mandate, with Jewish immigration accelerating under the Balfour Commitment and Arab resistance growing in parallel. Chapter 6. Every domino since the chain that never stopped falling. Now watch what happens. 1948. The State of Israel is declared inside the land promised to both Jews and Arabs. 5 Arab armies immediately go to war. 700,000 Palestinians are displaced. Arabs call it the Nakba, the catastrophe. The first Arab-Israeli war is fought over borders drawn in London by people who had never lived there. 1956. Egypt nationalizes the Suez Canal, the waterway Britain had always fought to control. Britain, France, and Israel invade. The United States forces them to retreat. The age of British imperial power in the Middle East ends, but the borders it drew remain. 1967, the Six-Day War. Israel captures the West Bank, Gaza, the Sinai, and the Golan Heights. The occupation of Palestinian territories begins. It has never ended. 1975. Lebanon descends into civil war. The sectarian fault lines drawn by France in 1920, Maronites in power over a country that is majority Muslim, explode into 15 years of conflict and 150,000 dead. 1980. Iraq invades Iran. The artificial borders of Mesopotamia, drawn in 1921 to suit British oil interests, create a state perpetually at war with itself and its neighbors. 1990. Iraq invades Kuwait. Saddam Hussein argues that Kuwait is historically part of Mesopotamia, a British invention that was always artificial. 2003. The US invades Iraq. The Sunni Shia Kurd division, the Churchill baked into the country in 1921, explodes. ISIS emerges from the rubble and, in 2014, bulldozes the Iraq-Syria border, releasing propaganda declaring that Sykes-Picot is finished. 2011, the Arab Spring. Syria collapses into civil war, a country whose borders were drawn to suit French colonial strategy in 1920. The living consequences: every major Middle East conflict since 1948 traces directly to borders drawn 1916 to 1921 by 2 European empires, neither of which consulted the people who lived there. The Kurds, 25 to 40 million people, still have no state. They live as minorities in Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. Every attempt at autonomy has been met with military suppression. Their statelessness is a direct product of the Cairo Conference of 1921 and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the most watched, most debated, most internationally contested piece of land on earth, began as a British promise made in bad faith to a minority population over land Britain did not own. The receipt is still being paid. 2 diplomats, 10 days in a Cairo hotel, a chinograph pencil. That is how you build a century of war. The people who drew these lines were not stupid. They understood perfectly what they were creating. States divided by sectarian fault lines, dependent on British patronage, too fragile to challenge imperial interests, too fractured to unite against the power that made them. Divide and rule is not a metaphor. It was the explicit strategy. You create the division. You maintain the rule. Britain left the Middle East in the 1940s and 1950s, but the architecture it built, the borders, the sectarian power structures, the competing claims over the same land, those it left standing. Every conflict you read about in the Middle East today, the Israeli-Palestinian war, the Syrian civil war, the Iraqi sectarian violence, the Kurdish struggle, the Lebanese fragility, each one has a line you can draw back to a hotel in Cairo in 1921, or a letter in 1950, or a 67-word document in 1917. The pencil stopped moving over a century ago. The bleeding never did. Learn the other side of the map. Next, the 5 borders that were drawn in an afternoon and are still causing wars today. The full map, the full story. Subscribe.